Okay, so this is Jim Bremner from the Canadian Tactical Officers Association, copcast.ca. Our first guest is Norm Gardner, and Norm was a longtime politician, formerly with the city of North York, then city of Toronto, and ultimately became the chair of the Police Services Board. And how are you today, Norm?
Oh, great. Thank you, Jim.
Oh, that's good. Getting through the COVID?
Yeah, well, had a little cabin fever here with all the restrictions and that, but, spring is coming and vaccinations are coming. So, hopefully things are going to get better.
Yeah, I think so now that the vaccine's being rolled out. And we've got spring on the way, so that brightens people's spirits. So what I want to ask you is, obviously, you and I have been around law enforcement for a long time. And, we're seeing police budgets of $1 billion. And as well, we're seeing, calls for that being reduced. How do we serve the public in these times?
Well, I think things are getting more difficult. And police have been defunded, at least in Toronto, for sure. I can remember 1992, which is quite a few years ago. The police strength for sworn officers was around 5,600. Now it's around 5,000, and that's recovering from about 4,700 because there was no hiring for a long time, and also reduced numbers of hiring. We weren't replacing people, and the politicians have been looking at the budget rather than the number of personnel and what the police have to do. They keep on talking. The politicians keep on talking about having police removed from certain calls and bringing in civilians. Only problem is that the police are the only ones that are around 24/7, and a lot of these other civilian agencies with social workers, et cetera, or crisis care workers are not on duty 24/7, at least not in the numbers that would be required to make calls. And when you get about at least 30,000 calls for mental illness problems and also domestic disputes, et cetera, I mean, these are things that the police have to respond to. And since nobody else is around to respond to those type of calls. So obviously, when you look at all the other work that are police doing, certainly a lot of the old aims, because there was an aim of having about 30% of police time being proactive and 70% to respond to calls. That 30% seems to have been really diminished because there's not much time now for proactive type of police duties, and more the concentration has been more on reactive. We have to, I think, from the police perspective of management, they're going to have to be looking at technology to do some of the more laborious type of police duties. But still, calls for service are not going down, and the problem, the challenge is going to be, what are you not going to be responding to? Are you not going to respond to minor calls? I mean, there's a lot of things now in terms of just taking a report after say a break-in or something like that. There's not an urgency for the police to respond right away. However, people do require police reports, etc. But when you have conflict, then the only person around basically to respond to is going to be a police officer. And this is, it puts a lot more stress on the officers, and especially with more and more multicultural situations involved. A lot of police are kind of walking on eggs, I think, in some respects. So policing is going to be much more challenging in terms of connecting with the public and how police respond to those interactions with the public.
Well, that's interesting in that it's a reverse square law, if you will, because ultimately people want that contact with the public, but we're no longer able to do that in certain circumstances. I mean, even, somebody that has damage to property, I still think wants to see a living, breathing police officer because it's a cathartic thing. That is the relating to the community.
Absolutely. I mean, I know I used to do quite a few ride-alongs, and the one thing people did feel more comfortable, I think, was when they saw a police officer. I mean, I would always ride with a sergeant, but when we got there, they were happy to see us. They were a little more comfortable anyway, in seeing a police officer respond, because they feel now somebody is actually taking an interest in what had taken place and whatever the situation was that they had a confrontation with, or the requirement for somebody to make a call and get somebody on the scene to see what was going on. And but unfortunately, what's happening too is the police are listening, or the police command, or the politicians anyway, are listening more to the critics of police than they are in than looking after the interests of their own employees, which are the officers. And I find that a little bit uncomfortable from my perspective, because my feeling was always that if an officer acted in good faith, that they should be supported, as long as they didn't do anything that was really dumb. But I mean, like, for instance, I'll just look at the incident where the lady, the young woman, fell off a balcony, and the family made an immediate accusation that the police had thrown her off, when police had nothing to do with throwing her off. In fact, the police were, from what I could read, were very respectful of the family. She wanted to go to the washroom. They let her go to the washroom. She comes out and runs off to the door, to the balcony, and tries to go on the other side of the balcony. Unfortunately, fell. Nobody ever apologized, from what I understand, after the police were cleared, to the officers that were involved. Unfortunately, the media are picking on the police to some degree, and the political people are expecting miracles from police, which are when they're only doing their duty and trying to apprehend people. And sometimes use of force is necessary, and they look at the use of force as being something that should never have happened. But we all know that there are people that are committing crimes, and they're not voluntarily going to be taken into custody. I know from one of my own personal experiences, going back way back. I was riding with a Sergeant Hoover in 31 Division, and we responded in the Kiel Lawrence area for some drug dealers selling drugs to girls. And so all the cruisers went racing down there, and the drug dealers started running. And fortunately, one of them wasn't too far from the car I was in, and I went after him and did a flying tackle and took him down. I did expect at that time that he was going to resist me, but he did not. In fact, he almost, let's put it this way, he was shaking like a leaf. And I didn't have to hit him. And we took him into custody. He was actually the only one that we captured that night. But it was, but if he had resisted, I would have probably hit him or done something to take him into custody. But it wasn't necessary. But unfortunately, there's a lot of people with mental illness around that are going to be confronted, and they're not going to want to be coming along peacefully.
I think you would agree that no officer starts their shift wanting to be involved in a violent confrontation.
No, you're right. I mean, you want to go out there and I mean, from my experience, most officers want to be police officers to do something good for the community.
So
And
police are a social service.
that's right. And I mean, like, there's other instances that that I was lucky enough to get involved with that all ended in really well. I mean, they weren't. Some of them were types of confrontation, like a domestic dispute one. In the case I was in, I came. We arrived after the paramedics had come because there were two brothers that got into a fight. And one of them had been on drugs, and the other one had punched him and caused some bleeding from his lips. And anyways, the call went in at 911. The ambulance people, the paramedics, got there before we did. We came in. We got the briefing from the brother that was kind of sober, and I went into the den where the other one was who had been injured, and I sat down just to de-escalate the situation. And it took a couple of minutes for the other guy to seem to even react. He just stared at us. But so the thing is, in a lot of, I think, training, you got to just kind of stand back a little bit and engage the situation as to how you're going to deal with it. If you don't really have to react quickly in terms of anybody's starting anything violent or anything like that, so we de-escalated the situation, and finally he let the paramedics take a look at him and take him away to the hospital. And so there was another time we just gave some people advice as to what to do in their particular situation. But the whole thing is confrontations are going to take place. I think the use of tasers has reduced the number of injuries to officers because just looking at a taser in some cases made some people less combative, and they just didn't want to get tasered. And I can't blame them for that. But I remember when I first started on the old police commission, we used to get force of injury reports, and there were a lot of injuries because of people just wanting to fight, and consequently, yes, we brought in some technology. The fighting got reduced, but there's still people around that are going to have to be apprehended and are not going to come along peacefully. So the challenge is with I think with mentally ill people and who sometimes grab a weapon, and then that puts the officers in danger, and they have to make some instant decisions as to how they're going to respond if they feel their life is in danger. But in the forefront, I think, as I said, the problem is going to be speaking up for officers too, and I think that's where sometimes the police associations now may have to do more protecting of their officers and getting much more involved in meeting with police boards and other, say, subcommittees that deal with criticism of police or reforming police. I don't think the police need to be reinformed or reformation among policing, but we have to get people or in some of the communities to be much more influential in making people accountable. And because we have so many different cultures around today, and some of them, if they come from areas where they're more autocratic regimes, are not really, say, welcoming police attention. unless they become victims, and then they all of a sudden want the police to come and rectify the situation. So I mean, I think this is some of the things we're going to have to be looking at too, in terms of protecting officers from undue criticism.
Yeah, with that said, protecting them again against the narratives, but as well physically, with reduced budgets, reduced personnel, do you see a return to the one-person vehicle?
I don't think that is satisfactory in today's climate. I think even though you have cameras being introduced, you need to have somebody there to back you up. I mean, I know that there's more tasers being distributed around today, but a police officer may get into a situation where the taser's not working, and the other person that was tasered may have a weapon. So you need somebody else around there to be the witness, and also in the event the taser fails, to take whatever action that they deem necessary at that particular time to safeguard the officers' lives and deal with the antagonist. So I'm not a proponent of the one-man vehicle. I did go ride-alongs in Florida where they're one-man vehicle. However, what happened there was when the police officer stopped the individual, he did make a call where the location was, and another vehicle or two would respond within seconds, so that the officer was not alone. But it's a different story down there, because in a lot of the American, especially with the sheriff's deputies, they get issued a car. The car is their car, so they're driving by themselves at all times. And but they do have the ability to get before they get out of the car to wait till another backup comes. So unless we're going to have more police on the street to respond to these backups, then somebody could push a one-man car. But I know that that in some of the visions, it's you might only have 3 or 4 cars out at night, and if you only have 3 or 4 cars out at night, and 1 or 2 of them are engaged in something, you don't have any time for somebody to come back you up. So as I say, I'm not a proponent of a one-man vehicle under the circumstances that we have to live within, say, the environment that we're in today, and serve in that type of environment.
Well, I'll wind up with this. Where do you see this going? What are, again, how do we meet everybody in the middle on this?
Well, I think certainly there's challenges. I think people in the command are kind of being nudged politically to some degree as to some of the initiatives that they are going to be taking in terms of policing. I like the idea of this neighborhood police officer type of thing, to get familiar with people in their respective areas. But I think that number one, we're going to have to look at technology. I think we have to still keep up the 2-man or the 2-person vehicles in a car, and that there may be some areas where it's deemed that police just are not going to do that kind of a service. So I think the public will suffer eventually with the reduced number of officers around. And I know that, with this COVID that came and other things, that there was a fair amount of officers that were just not on duty, and which because of isolation and other things, and that it puts much more stress on officers who are on duty and available for calls. So I think that say presidents of police associations should start getting a little bit more active in trying to look after their members and have much more of a say and try to participate with police service boards and in some of the things that the officers have to face and realize it, because when I brought up some of these things sometimes about officers and stress, and the answer I got from some people, well, you know what, they chose this profession so that they have to live with it. And I don't I didn't particularly like those kind of responses, because these people, a lot of these people have never gone out on a ride along with a police officer to see just what takes place and how effective a lot of our police officers are. I think our officers are very well trained, and because when you look at the few statistics where say violence had incurred, I mean 99% of the time our police are handling domestic disputes, mentally ill calls very, very well. But it's like that old story. You do somebody a favor 9 times out of 10. What do they remember? The one time you didn't. And so they expound on that. And that certainly, with the media looking at not much to do, they try to make a mountain out of a molehill in terms of a story, and sometimes try to put words in people's mouths. So you got to be careful how you respond. But as I say, I think policing is going to be a little bit more challenging, I think the associations are going to have to do a little bit more in terms of responding to some of the criticism of police tactics or what the officers were involved with in those specific incidents. So the good thing is it's exciting work, it's challenging, and the fact is that most officers are doing a great job.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and for your wisdom. And when this COVID is finally left, we'd be happy to have you in the studio to follow up.
Thanks very much. Thanks for asking me to participate. And you know where my loyalties lie. Thanks a lot, Jim.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.